"If I sing well, will you give me a plate of food?" Emily asked, her voice cracking as she stood in rags on the world's biggest stage. The judges laughed, the audience jeered, and Martin threw a dollar bill at her feet like she was trash. But when the first note left her lips, the laughter turned into a deathly silence, because that wasn't just a voice, it was the sound of a ghost from Martin's darkest secret. Before we reveal the secret that paralyzed the entire stadium, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. You won't want to miss how this homeless girl takes down a billionaire empire. The rain in New York didn't feel like water. It felt like needles against Emily's skin. At only 8 years old, she knew more about hunger than most adults knew about life. She clutched a small, rusted tin box to her chest, her only inheritance from a life that felt like a dream she had once had. Inside that box wasn't gold or jewelry. It was a single, faded photograph of a woman with emerald eyes and a silver locket. "Please, just a crust of bread," Emily whispered to a man in a tuxedo entering the theater. He stepped over her as if she were a puddle of dirty water. The theater was hosting The Voice of Destiny, the biggest talent show in the country. The winner would get $5 million and a contract with Orion Records, but Emily wasn't there for the fame. She had seen a flyer near the trash cans, "Free buffet for participants." To Emily, participant meant food. She slipped through the back loading dock, hiding behind racks of sequined gowns and massive speakers. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. The smell of roasted chicken and fresh bread wafted from the catering area, making her dizzy. Suddenly, a heavy hand grabbed her shoulder. "Hey, what are you doing here?" It was a security guard with a stern face. Emily trembled, her bare feet slipping on the polished floor. "I'm here to sing, for the food." The guard was about to throw her out when a voice crackled through his radio. "We're down one contestant. Slot 42 didn't show up. We need a body on stage now. The cameras are rolling." The guard looked at the monitor, then at Emily's dirty face. A wicked idea formed in his mind. The show's producer, Martin Cole, loved freak shows. He loved mocking people for ratings. "You want to sing, kid? Fine, you're slot 42. Follow me." As Emily stepped onto the stage, the contrast was jarring. The stage was worth millions. She wasn't worth the clothes on her back. Martin Cole, the lead judge, leaned back in his leather chair. He was a man with sharp features and eyes that looked like cold glass. He looked at Emily with visible disgust. "Is this a joke?" Martin shouted, his voice echoing through the speakers. "Did the circus lose a performer?" The audience erupted in laughter. Emily looked down at her feet. The wounds from walking miles were starting to bleed again. "I just want to sing," Emily whispered into the microphone. "Look at you," Martin sneered, leaning forward. "You smell like the gutter. Tell me, little rat, why should we waste a single second on you?" Emily took a deep breath. She remembered her mother's voice. "When the world is loud, Emily, your soul must be louder." "If I sing well," Emily said, her voice finally steady, "will you give me a plate of food? My little brother. He hasn't eaten in 2 days." The silence that followed wasn't out of respect. It was shock at her audacity. Martin laughed, a dry, cruel sound. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a crisp $100 bill, crumpling it into a ball and tossing it at her feet. "There's your food, kid. Now, sing something so we can all have a good laugh before security drags you out." Emily didn't pick up the money. She closed her eyes. She didn't see the cameras. She didn't see the angry judge. She saw her mother's face. She began to hum. It was a low, haunting melody, a lullaby that had been out of print for 30 years. A song written by the founder of Orion Records, Thomas Cole, for his lost granddaughter. As the first actual word left her lips, Martin's smirk froze. The color drained from his face so fast it looked like he had seen a ghost. Because that song, that specific arrangement, only one person in the world was supposed to know it, and she was supposed to be dead. The melody that Emily sang wasn't just music. It was a haunting vibration that seemed to peel back the layers of time. In the front row, socialites in diamonds leaned forward, their faces twisted in confusion. Why was a child in rags singing a song that sounded like it belonged in a cathedral? But on the judges' panel, Martin Cole felt like the floor was opening up beneath him. 30 years. It had been 30 years since he had last heard that specific bridge. The way the notes dipped into a minor key before soaring into a desperate, beautiful plea. It was the song of the Silver Locket, a masterpiece written by the legendary Thomas Cole, the founder of the Orion Empire and Martin's own brother. Thomas had written it for his wife, and later it became the lullaby for his only grandchild, the heir to the billion-dollar Cole legacy. A child who was supposed to have perished in a tragic house fire 5 years ago. "Stop!" Martin suddenly screamed, his voice cracking over the microphone. The feedback shrieked through the theater, making Emily flinch and cover her ears. "Stop this nonsense immediately! Who told you to sing that? Who put you up to this?" The audience gasped. The sudden outburst of anger was unprovoked. Emily looked up, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and a strange, deep-seated recognition she couldn't yet name. "It's just my mother's song," Emily whispered, her voice amplified by the mic she still held. "She told me if I ever got lost, I should sing it, and the stars would lead me home." Martin's face turned a sickly shade of purple. "Your mother was a nobody. You're a street rat trying to scam a national television show. Security, get this brat off my stage." But before the guards could reach her, the second judge, Elena Vance, a world-renowned opera singer known for her integrity, put a firm hand on Martin's arm. "Sit down, Martin," Elena said, her voice cold as ice. "The girl hasn't finished, and quite frankly, that's the most soul I've heard on this stage in a decade. If you touch her, I walk off this set and the sponsors go with me." The crowd erupted. They didn't know the backstory, but they knew drama. They began chanting, "Let her sing." High above the chaos, behind a one-way glass mirror, sat a man the world thought was a recluse. Arthur Cole, the patriarch of the family and Thomas's father. He had spent years mourning his son and his dead granddaughter. His heart, once hardened by grief, was now hammering against his ribs. He gripped the silver handle of his cane until his knuckles turned white. He turned to his assistant, a sharp-eyed woman named Sarah. "Sarah, that song. Thomas only played that for the baby. Nobody else had the sheet music. Martin claimed he burned everything after the fire." Arthur's voice was a low growl. "Look at her eyes. Those are Thomas's eyes. Get me a DNA kit, and do not let that girl leave the building." Martin realized he was losing control. If he kicked her out now, it would look like he was hiding something. He had to change tactics. He had to humiliate her so badly that she would run away and never show her face again. "Fine," Martin sneered, leaning back and trying to mask his trembling. "You want to sing for food? Let's make it interesting. You finish the song, but if you miss even one note, if your voice cracks even once, you leave this city tonight. I'll have the police escort you to the border for trespassing. Deal." Emily looked at the $100 bills still lying on the floor. She thought of her brother, Leo, huddling under a bridge with a fever, waiting for her to bring back something, anything to eat. "I won't miss a note," Emily said. She closed her eyes again. This time, she didn't just see her mother. She felt a strange warmth, as if a golden thread was connecting her heart to the very stage she stood on. She began the second verse. "Where the silver rivers bend, and the golden willow weeps. I'll wait for you, my darling, while the rest of the world sleeps." As she sang, the giant screens behind her, usually reserved for flashy graphics, began to glitch. A young IT technician backstage, a boy named Toby who had grown up in the same foster system as Emily, was watching her with tears in his eyes. He recognized her. He had seen her singing for coins outside the subway. Toby knew Martin Cole was a shark. He had seen the private folders on the station's server. He knew Martin had been embezzling from the Cole Foundation. "Not today, Martin," Toby whispered, his fingers flying across the keyboard. Suddenly, the screen behind Emily didn't show the Voice of Destiny logo. It showed an old, grainy home video. The audience went dead silent. The video showed a younger Thomas Cole, laughing as he sat at a piano. And on his lap was a tiny toddler with the same emerald eyes as the girl on stage. They were singing the same song, together. Martin stood up, his chair clattering to the floor. "Turn it off, cut the feed, Toby, I'll kill you, cut the power." But the audience was mesmerized. The horizontal logic was clicking into place for everyone watching at home. This wasn't a talent show anymore. This was a live unveiling of a crime. Emily stopped singing, staring up at the screen. She saw the man in the video. She saw the piano. A memory, long buried under the trauma of the fire, began to resurface. "Daddy," she whispered into the silent room. The word carried through the speakers like a thunderclap. In that moment, Martin knew his empire was crumbling. He signaled to two of his personal security guards, men who weren't just guards, but fixers. They started moving toward Emily from the wings of the stage, their faces grim. "The girl is a hallucinating brat," Martin shouted to the cameras, trying to save face for the millions watching. "This video is a deepfake, a prank by a disgruntled employee." But the crowd wasn't listening to Martin anymore. They were looking at Emily, who was now surrounded. "I'm not a prank," Emily said, her voice rising with a newfound strength. "And I don't want your money, Uncle Martin. I remember the smell of smoke. I remember you standing by the door while the house burned. I remember. You took my locket." Martin froze. The locket. The one piece of evidence he had kept as a trophy, hidden in the safe in his dressing room. Just as the guards reached for Emily, a booming voice echoed from the back of the auditorium. "Get away from her." Arthur Cole was standing at the entrance of the VIP section, his cane raised like a weapon. Behind him stood the NYPD. The atmosphere in the Grand Orion Theater shifted from a talent show to a crime scene in a heartbeat. The heavy oak doors at the back of the auditorium had been slammed open by Arthur Cole's security detail, but it was the old man himself who commanded the room. Arthur, the ghost of Wall Street, was supposed to be bedridden in a medical suite in the Hamptons. Seeing him stand there, his silver-headed cane trembling not from weakness but from rage, was like seeing a statue come to life. "I said, get your filthy hands off her," Arthur's voice boomed, amplified by the stunned silence of the crowd. Martin Cole felt the sweat slicking his palms. He looked at the cameras. The red lights were still blinking. Millions of people were watching. He couldn't just have Emily kidnapped in front of a live audience. He had to pivot. He had to play the victim of a grand delusion. "Father," Martin shouted, his voice cracking as he tried to force a tone of concern. "Thank God you're here. This poor child is being used by someone to hurt our family. Look at her. She's been coached. Someone found an old video of Thomas and taught this beggar girl his song to extort us. It's a cruel prank, Father. Security, please. Take her to a private room so we can get to the bottom of who is exploiting her." It was a masterstroke of manipulation. By framing it as protecting Emily from exploiters, Martin was trying to regain control of the narrative. But Emily wasn't the same girl who had walked onto the stage shivering for a plate of food. Something had awakened inside her. The sight of the old man at the back of the room, the way he tilted his head, the way his eyes narrowed, it triggered a flash of a memory. A library filled with leather-bound books, the smell of peppermint and old paper, a voice saying, "One day, Emily, all of this will be yours to protect." "You're lying," Emily said. Her voice wasn't loud, but into the stillness of the theater, it rang like a bell. She pointed a small, dirt-stained finger at Martin. "You didn't try to save me. You watched the house burn. You took the locket from my mother's neck while she couldn't breathe. You told me to run into the woods and never come back, or the bad men would find me." The audience gasped. A collective shiver ran through the crowd. Elena Vance, the judge who had stood up for Emily, moved closer to the girl, placing a protective arm around her small shoulders. "Martin," Elena said, her eyes fixed on the man she had worked with for 5 years. "If what she says is true, if you have that locket, then you are a monster." "I don't have any locket," Martin hissed, his composure finally shattering. "She's a liar, a street-dwelling, thieving liar." Toby locked the heavy steel door of the server room. He knew he only had minutes. He had already broadcast the home movie, but he had something even more damaging. While working on the station's digital archives, He had stumbled upon a deleted folder from 5 years ago, the night of the fire. It contained a series of frantic emails between Martin and a local developer who wanted the Cole estate land. The brother and the kid are handled. The fire will look like an electrical short. Make sure the insurance goes through my offshore account, one email read. Toby's heart was racing. Come on, upload, come on, he whispered to the progress bar on his screen. He was sending the files to every major news outlet in the country. Suddenly, the door rattled. A heavy boot slammed against the metal. Open up, kid, we know you're in there, a gravelly voice shouted. Toby didn't answer. He saw the upload hit 98%, 99%. The door hinges groaned. The fixers were using a crowbar. Toby looked at the small ventilation duct in the ceiling. He was thin, but it would be a tight squeeze. He grabbed his external hard drive, shoved it into his pocket, and scrambled up the desk. Arthur Cole had reached the front of the stage. He looked up at Emily, his eyes misty. Child, he said, his voice softening, if you are who you say you are, tell me something only my Emily would know, not a song, not a name, a secret. The world held its breath. Martin stood frozen, praying that the trauma of the fire had wiped her memory clean. Emily looked at the old man. She saw the silver lion head on his cane. She remembered sitting on the floor, playing with that very lion. You used to hide peppermint candies in your left pocket, Emily whispered. But you told Grandma they were heart pills so she wouldn't get mad at you for eating sugar. Arthur Cole's cane hit the floor with a heavy thud. He didn't need a DNA test. He didn't need a locket. He let out a choked sob and reached out his shaking hands. My little bird, he breathed. Enough, Martin screamed. He realized the game was up. If Arthur took her in, Martin would be stripped of his CEO title, his mansion, and his freedom. He lunged forward, not toward Arthur, but toward Emily. His face was a mask of pure, unadulterated malice. If I can't have the empire, no one will. He reached for Emily's throat, but he never made it. 2 NYPD officers tackled him to the ground, the sound of his head hitting the stage echoing through the microphones. Martin Cole, you are under arrest for the attempted murder of Emily Cole and the suspected arson of the Cole estate, the lead officer declared, clicking the handcuffs into place. The audience erupted into a standing ovation, but Emily didn't hear them. She ran to the edge of the stage and threw herself into Arthur's arms. The contrast was stark, the wealthiest man in the city holding a girl in rags, but in that moment they were both finally home. The flashing lights of ambulances and police cars painted the wet streets in red and blue. Martin was being shoved into the back of a squad car, screaming about his company. Arthur sat in the back of a black limousine, Emily wrapped in a thick cashmere blanket, a plate of warm sandwiches on the seat between them. She was eating slowly, her hands still shaking. Where is Leo? She asked suddenly, her eyes wide with fear. My brother, he's still under the bridge, he's sick, I have to go to him. Arthur looked at his assistant, Sarah. You heard her. Every car we own, every man we hire, find that boy now. But as the limo prepared to pull away, Toby, the IT kid, came running out of the theater's side exit, his shirt torn and his face bruised. Wait, Toby yelled. Mr. Cole, you need to see this. He handed Arthur his hard drive. It's not just the fire, sir. Martin wasn't working alone. He has partners, people who are still out there. People who will come for the girl as soon as the cameras stop rolling. Arthur looked at the screen, his face turning to stone. The list of names on the drive included some of the most powerful people in the city, judges, politicians, and rival CEOs. The battle isn't over, Emily, Arthur said, looking down at his granddaughter. It's only just begun. The luxury of the car felt like a cage to Emily. Every second they spent sitting in traffic, every red light they encountered, felt like a minute stolen from her brother's life. Leo was only 6. He had been coughing for 3 days, a deep, rattling sound that made Emily's heart squeeze with fear. She had left him hidden under the rusted girders of the Manhattan Bridge, covered with old newspapers and a single moth-eaten wool blanket. We're almost there, little bird, Arthur said, his voice cracking. He reached out to touch her shoulder, but Emily flinched. The trauma of the last 5 years didn't vanish just because she was in a warm car. To her, every man in a suit was a potential threat. "He's by the third pillar," Emily whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the engine. "Near the green dumpster, please. The rats come out when it rains this hard. He's scared of the rats." Arthur's jaw tightened. He picked up the car phone. "This is Arthur Cole. I want every ambulance within 5 miles diverted to the Manhattan Bridge. If my grandson isn't found in the next 10 minutes, I'll buy the hospital and fire every board member by sunrise. Move." While the world was celebrating the miracle on stage, a darker shadow was moving through the wings. 2 men in nondescript gray suits, Martin's partners, were standing by the loading dock. They weren't looking for Martin, they were looking for Toby. "The kid has the drive," the taller one, Silas, said. He had a scar running through his eyebrow that made him look perpetually angry. "If those files hit the public server, we're all going to prison. Not just for the fire, but for the offshore accounts." "The girl is the key," the other man replied, checking a silenced pistol hidden in his jacket. "As long as she's alive, the DNA stands. Without her, the drive is just hearsay. Find the boy. The girl will go wherever the boy is." They had intercepted the radio chatter from Arthur's security. They knew exactly where the limousine was heading. The limousine screeched to a halt. Emily didn't wait for the driver to open the door. She threw herself out into the rain, her bare feet splashing into the freezing puddles. "Leo!" she screamed, her voice echoing against the massive steel beams above. The bridge groaned as a subway train roared overhead, drowning out her cries. The smell of salt water and rotting trash was overwhelming. Arthur struggled out of the car, leaning heavily on his cane, his security team fan-folding out into the darkness with high-powered flashlights. "Search everywhere," Arthur commanded. Emily ran toward the third pillar. The green dumpster was there, knocked over by the wind. But the spot where she had left Leo was empty. The newspapers were scattered and soaked. The wool blanket was snagged on a piece of rebar, flapping in the wind like a dead bird's wing. "No, no, no," Emily sobbed, dropping to her knees and digging through the wet trash. "Leo, it's me. I brought food. I brought the grandfather." A flash of red caught her eye. 10 yards away, near the edge of the churning river, a small figure was curled into a ball. "Leo." She sprinted toward him, but as she got closer, she realized Leo wasn't alone. A man was standing over him. It wasn't one of Arthur's guards. It was Silas. He held a small, glowing device in his hand, a thermal tracker, and in his other hand he held a sedative. "Stay back, kid," Silas said, his voice like grinding gravel. "You've caused enough trouble for one night. You're coming with us. We're going to a place where you and your brother can disappear properly this time." "Leave him alone," Emily shrieked. She didn't think. She didn't calculate. She lunged at Silas, biting his hand with the desperation of a trapped animal. Silas roared in pain, dropping the sedative. He raised a heavy hand to strike the girl, but a sharp crack echoed through the air. A bullet hit the concrete inches from Silas's foot. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," a voice called out. It was Toby. He had followed them, hitching a ride on the back of a delivery truck. He wasn't holding a gun. Arthur's lead security officer, who had moved up silently behind Toby, was the one with the weapon drawn. "Drop the boy, Silas," the officer said. "The police are 2 minutes away. There is nowhere left to run." Silas looked at the water, then at the guards closing in. He sneered, kicking Leo's limp body toward the edge of the pier before turning and disappearing into the labyrinth of shipping containers. Emily dived for Leo, grabbing his jacket just as his small frame started to slide toward the dark, icy river. She pulled him back, hugging him to her chest. He was burning up with fever, his breath coming in shallow, ragged gasps. "I've got you, Leo. I've got you," she whispered, tears mingling with the rain on her face. The silence of the hospital was a sharp contrast to the roar of the bridge. Leo was hooked up to an IV and an oxygen mask. The doctors said it was severe pneumonia, but he was stable. He was a fighter, just like his sister. Arthur stood by the window, watching the sun begin to bleed over the New York skyline. He looked older than he had 3 hours ago. Emily was sitting in a chair next to Leo's bed. She refused to change out of her rags until she knew he was okay. In her lap sat the silver locket. Arthur's team had recovered it from Martin's private safe during the arrest. She clicked it open. Inside were 2 tiny portraits, her mother, her father. "They loved you so much," Arthur said, coming to stand behind her. "Thomas used to tell me that your voice was the only thing that could make him forget the stress of the business. He called you his morning star." Emily looked up at him. Why did Uncle Martin do it? He had everything. He had a big house and cars. Why did he want ours too? Arthur sighed, a sound full of regret. "Some people have a hole in their hearts that no amount of money can fill, Emily. Martin didn't just want the money. He wanted to be Thomas. He hated that the world loved my son more than they loved him." Suddenly, the door to the room swung open. Sarah, Arthur's assistant, walked in. Her face was pale. "Sir, you need to see the news. Now." She turned on the television in the corner. A news anchor was standing in front of the Orion Theater. In a shocking turn of events, Martin Cole has been released on bail just 2 hours after his arrest. A high court judge signed the order, citing lack of physical evidence and procedural errors. Even more disturbing, the IT technician who leaked the files, Toby Miller, has been reported missing. His apartment was found ransacked only 20 minutes ago. The locket slipped from Emily's hands, hitting the floor with a metallic ring. Arthur's hand gripped his cane so hard the wood groaned. "The partners," he whispered. "They aren't just protecting Martin, they're cleaning up the witnesses." Emily looked at her sleeping brother, then at her grandfather. The fear was gone now, replaced by a cold, hard determination. "They think we're just kids," Emily said, her voice sounding much older than 8 years old. "They think because we were on the streets, we don't know how to fight." She stood up and walked over to the television, pointing at the screen where Martin's smug face was being shown. "He thinks he won because he's out of jail," Emily said. "But he forgot one thing, I still have the song, and the whole world is listening now." Arthur looked at his granddaughter and saw the fire of the Cole family burning in her eyes. "What are you thinking, little bird?" "We don't hide," Emily said. "We go back to the stage. We tell the whole story, every name on that drive, every word he said to me in the fire. We don't use a lawyer, we use the music." The injustice was a physical weight in the room. Martin hadn't just escaped. He had been protected by a system he helped build. The partners Toby had discovered weren't just names on a list. They were the very people supposed to uphold the law. Arthur Cole stood by the door, his hand trembling on his cane. He had spent 50 years building an empire, believing that wealth bought security. But looking at his granddaughter in her torn hoodie and his grandson struggling to breathe through an oxygen mask, he realized he had been wrong. Wealth didn't buy safety. It only made you a bigger target. "Grandfather," Emily said, her voice cutting through the hum of the IV drip. "They aren't going to stop, are they? As long as we are here, we are evidence they need to bury." Arthur looked at her, seeing the ghost of his son Thomas in the set of her jaw. "No, Emily, they won't stop. Martin has the judges, he has the police commissioners, he has the money I thought was ours. To the world, he is still the CEO of Orion. To the world, you are still just a girl from the streets who knows a song." "Then we change the world," Emily said. She stood up and walked toward the window. Below, a crowd of reporters was still gathered at the hospital gates. They were looking for a story, a tragedy, a miracle, anything to fill the 24-hour news cycle. "Toby told me something before he disappeared," Emily whispered. "He said that the internet is like a river. Once you pour something into it, you can't take it back. Martin can bribe a judge, but he can't bribe everyone with a phone." Toby Miller was huddled in a corner, his hands zip-tied behind his back. His lip was split, and his glasses were cracked, but his spirit wasn't broken. Standing over him was Silas, the man with the scarred eyebrow. Silas was holding Toby's external hard drive, tossing it up and down like a baseball. "You're a smart kid, Toby," Silas said, his voice a low growl. "You almost pulled it off. But you forgot that in this city, the shadows are longer than the lights. Now, tell me the encryption key for the archive folder, and maybe you'll live long enough to see the sun go down. Toby looked up, a bloody grin on his face. You're too late, Silas. I didn't just upload the files to the server. I set a dead man's switch. If I don't check in every 6 hours, the entire drive goes public on every torrent site from here to Tokyo. Silas froze. He lunged forward, grabbing Toby by the collar. You're lying, you don't have the guts. Try me, Toby spat. But while you're standing here playing tough guy, the girl is already doing something you can't stop. She's not hiding. She's going back to the theater. The Voice of Destiny finale was supposed to be a celebration of Martin Cole's triumph over the scandalous accusations. He had hired a PR firm to spin the story. The homeless girl was a plant by a rival company to tank Orion's stock. The theater was packed. The elite of New York sat in the velvet seats, sipping champagne, laughing off the drama of the previous night. Martin sat on the judges' panel, looking like a king restored to his throne. Ladies and gentlemen, Martin said into the gold-plated microphone, his voice smooth and hypnotic. Last night we were all victims of a cruel hoax, but the show must go on. Tonight we crown the true winner of... Suddenly, the house lights slammed to black. The audience gasped. A low, rhythmic thumping started, the sound of a heartbeat, amplified through the world-class sound system. The massive LED screen behind the judges flickered to life. It didn't show the show's logo. It showed a live feed from a small, dimly lit room. In the center of the frame was Emily. She was wearing the same rags, the same dirt on her face, but she was sitting behind a grand piano. "My name is Emily Cole," she said. Her voice was being broadcast not just to the theater, but to every digital billboard in Times Square and every live streaming platform on the planet. Arthur had used the last of his untainted connections to hijack the Orion satellite feed. 30 minutes ago, my brother Leo woke up in the hospital, Emily continued, her eyes staring directly into the lens. He asked me if we were going back to the bridge. He asked if the bad man was still in charge. On the judges' panel, Martin's face went from pale to ghostly white. He signaled frantically to the tech booth to cut the power, but nothing happened. Toby, dead man's switch had locked the system. Martin Cole says I am a hoax. Emily's voice grew stronger. He says my father's song is a lie, so I'm not going to talk anymore. I'm going to show you. She began to play. It wasn't the lullaby this time. It was a dark, percussive melody that sounded like a storm approaching. As she played, images began to flash on the screen behind her. These weren't home movies. They were the files from Toby's drive. Photo, Martin meeting with Silas in a dark alley. Document, an insurance claim for the Cole mansion, signed 3 days before the fire. Audio, a grainy recording of Martin's voice saying, "The girl is a loose end. Make sure she doesn't survive the winter." The theater was so silent you could hear the champagne bubbles popping. The elite, the judges, the socialites, they all turned their heads to look at Martin. Martin stood up, knocking his chair over. "This is a fabrication. I'll sue everyone in this room." "Play the archive folder, Emily," a voice whispered over the speakers. It was Toby. He had managed to trigger the release from his remote location. The screen changed one last time. It was a video from a hidden security camera in Martin's own office, dated the night Emily appeared on stage. "Video, Martin. I don't care about the DNA. If that brat stays alive, the grandfather will leave her the voting shares. Hire Silas. Tell him to handle the brother. If the boy dies, the girl will crumble. It's easier that way." The roar that erupted from the audience wasn't applause. It was a roar of pure, righteous fury. Emily stopped playing. She looked into the camera, a single tear tracing a path through the dirt on her cheek. "Uncle Martin," she whispered, "the food you gave me last night, I didn't eat it. I gave it to a dog on the street, because even a dog knows when a gift comes from a hand filled with blood." At that moment, the doors of the theater burst open. This time, it wasn't just the NYPD. It was the FBI, and they weren't there for a procedural error. The partners were being rounded up. Silas had been caught trying to flee to the airport. The judges who had signed Martin's bail were being led out in handcuffs. Arthur Cole stood at the center of the chaos, holding a phone to his ear. "He's safe. Good. Keep the guards on the door." He looked up as the FBI led a screaming Martin Cole past him. Martin stopped, his eyes bloodshot and crazed. "You think you won, Arthur? You think this little girl can run a billion-dollar company? She's a street rat. She'll be forgotten in a week." Arthur didn't even look at him. He looked at Emily, who was walking toward them, wrapped in her grandfather's oversized wool coat. "She won't be running the company alone, Martin," Arthur said quietly. "She'll have me, and she'll have the truth, two things you never had." As Martin was shoved into the van, a reporter managed to get a microphone close to Emily. Emily, what are you going to do now? You're the richest girl in the world. What do you want?" Emily looked at the camera, then at the bright lights of New York. "I want to go to the hospital," she said. "I promised Leo we'd have a real dinner tonight, and then I'm going to find every bridge in this city, and I'm going to make sure nobody has to sing for a plate of food ever again." The world thought the story ended when Martin Cole was led away in handcuffs. The homeless heiress had won. The evil uncle had fallen. But inside the high-security recovery wing of the Cole estate's private clinic, Arthur Cole was looking at a digital map that suggested the rot went much deeper than one greedy relative. Toby Miller lay in the bed, his head bandaged, his fingers still twitching as if typing on a ghostly keyboard. He had been found in that Brooklyn warehouse just minutes before the fixers could finish him. He had survived, but he was terrified. "They aren't just business partners, Mr. Cole," Toby whispered, his voice raspy. "Martin was a foot soldier, the person who really funded the accident 5 years ago, the person who made sure the police reports vanished. They weren't even on that stage." Arthur leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "Then who, Toby? Who has enough power to hide a murder for 5 years?" Toby reached for his cracked tablet on the nightstand. With a trembling hand, he pulled up a hidden partition in the encrypted drive. "Martin was paying consulting fees to a shell company called Apex Horizon. I traced the ownership through 14 different countries. It all leads back to one name." Arthur looked at the screen, and for the first time in his life, the legendary billionaire felt a cold spike of genuine fear. The name wasn't a stranger. It was Judge Alastair Thorne, the very man who was currently presiding over the grand jury investigation into Martin's crimes. The fox wasn't just in the henhouse, the fox owned the farm. Emily couldn't sleep. The bed was too soft. The silk sheets felt slippery and strange against her skin. For years, she had slept on concrete or cardboard, where the texture of the world was rough and predictable. Here, everything was silent, and silence felt like a trap. She got up and walked to the massive floor-to-ceiling window. In the distance, she could see the glowing lights of the Manhattan Bridge. Somewhere down there, under the steel and the grime, were the people she had left behind. She thought of old Pete, the man who shared his bread with her, and Sarah, the girl who taught her how to find the warmest steam vents. She realized that while she was now surrounded by gold, she was still a prisoner. Martin was in jail, but she still felt the shadows. Suddenly, a soft knock came at her door. It was Leo. He was wearing brand-new blue pajamas, looking small but much healthier. The fever had broken, but his eyes were wide with the same restless energy. "Emily," he whispered. "I heard a noise, like a scratching on the window." Emily's instincts, honed by 5 years of survival, screamed at her. She didn't turn on the light. She grabbed Leo and pulled him under the heavy mahogany desk. "Don't make a sound," she breathed into his ear. Outside, on the balcony of the third-story suite, a shadow moved. It wasn't a ghost, and it wasn't a fan looking for an autograph. It was a professional, a man wearing night vision goggles and a suppressed pistol. Judge Thorne knew that if Martin talked, he was finished. But if the Cole heirs died in a tragic, accidental fire, a repeat of history, then the estate would fall into a legal limbo that he, as the presiding judge, could control. The glass door of the balcony slid open with a hiss. The assassin stepped into the room, his boots making no sound on the thick carpet. He moved toward the bed, raising his weapon. He fired 3 shots into the pillows. Thwip, thwip, thwip. Silence. The assassin frowned. He stepped closer to pull back the covers, but they were empty. Suddenly, the room was flooded with blinding white light. Looking for someone. Arthur Cole stood at the doorway, but he wasn't alone. He was flanked by a team of ex-Mossad bodyguards he had flown in from London the moment Toby mentioned Judge Thorne. The assassin didn't hesitate. He dived for the balcony, but a heavy hand caught his ankle. It was Sila's. Wait, Sila's. The man with the scarred eyebrow, Martin's former fixer, was now standing over the assassin. Sila's had realized that Martin and Thorne were going to kill him to tie up loose ends. He had traded his testimony for protection. The judge sent you, didn't he, Miller? Sila's growled, pinning the assassin to the floor. He always was a sloppy boss. Emily and Leo crawled out from under the desk. Emily's face was pale, but her eyes were like flint. She looked at the assassin, then at her grandfather. He's not going to stop, Emily said. Even if we put them all in jail, someone else will want the money. Someone else will want the power. Not if we take away the power, Emily, Arthur said, his voice cold. The Cole Foundation is a $1 billion prize. As long as it's a prize, people will kill for it. So we're going to do something Martin never dreamed of. The world was expecting a victory parade. Instead, they got a press conference. Emily stood on a podium in front of the New York Stock Exchange. She looked different. She was wearing a simple, clean dress, but she still had the silver locket around her neck. Last night, someone tried to kill my brother and me, she started. The reporters gasped, their cameras clicking like 1,000 insects. They tried to kill us because of money, because of shares, because of a legacy. Well, I've talked to my grandfather, and we've made a decision. As of this moment, the Cole estate is being dissolved. A deafening silence fell over the crowd. Every penny of the $1 billion fund is being moved into a public trust, Emily continued. It will be managed by a board of people who have actually lived on the streets. People like Toby Miller. People who know what it's like to be hungry. She looked directly into the main camera, knowing Judge Thorne was watching from his high-back chair in the courthouse. The money is gone, Judge. There's nothing left to steal. There's nothing left to kill for, but I still have the one thing you can't touch. She leaned into the microphone and sang a single line from the lullaby, her voice echoing off the stone buildings of Wall Street. The truth is a mountain that no wind can move. Behind the scenes, the FBI was already entering Judge Thorne's chambers. With the money moved into a public trust, the partners began to turn on each other like starving wolves. Thorne's secret bank accounts were seized. The silent architect was finally exposed. Toby was sitting in a wheelchair, watching the sun dip below the horizon. Emily and Leo sat on the edge of the roof next to him, eating real pizza from a box. You really did it, Emily, Toby said, shaking his head. You gave it all away. You could have been the Queen of New York. Emily took a bite of her pizza and smiled. It was the first real, genuine smile Leo had seen in years. I don't want to be a queen, Toby, she said. I just wanted to be a sister, and for the first time in 5 years, I don't feel like I'm running. But as they laughed, Emily noticed a black car parked across the street. A man was watching them through binoculars. He wasn't a judge. He wasn't a fixer. He had a military tattoo on his forearm, the same one her father used to have. The man put the binoculars down and picked up a radio. Subject is secure. She has no idea about the second project. Proceed to phase 2. The world now knew Emily as the generous heiress, the girl who gave away $1 billion to feed the hungry. But as Emily stared at the military insignia on her father's desk, she realized she didn't know the man who had tucked her in at night. Thomas Cole wasn't just a businessman or a pianist. He was a man with a shadow life, a life that was now reaching out from the grave to pull her back in. He never told me, Emily whispered, her fingers tracing the silver wings on the badge. He said he was just a music lover. He was protecting you, Emily, Arthur's voice came from the doorway. He looked tired, his shadow stretching long across the hardwood floor. Your father was part of an elite unit, specialists in economic recovery. They didn't just fight wars, they took back what was stolen from the weak. That's why Martin hated him. It wasn't just the money, it was the power Thomas held over the city's darkest secrets. Suddenly, the tactical radio on the desk hissed to life. Static filled the room, followed by a voice that sounded like gravel grinding against silk. Morning Star, do you copy? The vault is open. The second project is live. We are coming for the inheritance. Emily and Arthur froze. Morning Star was her father's code name for her, but who was on the other end? The man with the military tattoo, the one Emily saw from the hospital roof, was standing in front of a wall of monitors. His name was Commander Vance, the brother of Judge Elena Vance. But while Elena fought for justice in the light, Vance operated in the gray zone. Martin was a fool, Vance said, his eyes fixed on a satellite thermal image of the Cole estate. He tried to kill the girl for a bank account. He didn't realize that the real wealth isn't in the public trust she just created. It's in the black ledger Thomas hid in her silver locket. Sir, the girl gave away the money, a technician reported. She has no value now. You're wrong, Vance sneered. The locket isn't just a piece of jewelry, it's a hardware key. It contains the decryption codes for every offshore account held by the partners. If we get that locket, we don't just own New York. We own the people who run it. The silence of the night was shattered by the sound of glass breaking, not from the front door, but from the roof. This wasn't a messy hit like the one Judge Thorne ordered. This was a military-grade extraction. Black-clad figures rappelled down the sides of the mansion. No lights, no shouting, just the professional click of night vision goggles. Inside, Emily didn't panic. 5 years on the street had taught her that fear was a luxury she couldn't afford. She grabbed Leo, who was sleeping on the sofa, and pulled him toward the heavy oak bookshelves. "Grandfather, the panic room," she shouted. But Arthur was already being cornered in the hallway. 2 men held him firmly, while Commander Vance stepped into the light. "I don't want to hurt the old man, Emily," Vance called out into the dark house. "I just want the locket. Give it to me, and I'll let you and the boy go back to your public trust and live your quiet little lives." Emily stood in the shadows of the library, her hand clutching the silver locket around her neck. She felt the weight of it, the cold metal against her skin. She remembered her father's words. "This is the heart of our family, Emily. Never let it stop beating." She looked at the locket. She noticed a tiny, microscopic indentation on the side, a fingerprint scanner disguised as a floral design. "Leo, get in the crawl space," Emily whispered. "Whatever happens, don't come out until the music starts." "Music," Leo trembled. "Emily, what are you doing?" Emily didn't answer. She stepped out into the hallway, the locket held high in her hand. "You want it?" Emily asked, her voice echoing through the mansion. "Come and get it, but you should know. My father taught me how to sing for my supper, and he taught me how to defend my home." As Vance moved toward her, Emily didn't run. She pressed her thumb against the locket's hidden scanner. Click. The locket didn't open to show a picture. It emitted a high-frequency burst, a signal that Thomas Cole had programmed to trigger a fail-safe. Suddenly, every speaker in the house, every digital device, and every street lamp for 3 blocks began to play the lullaby at a deafening volume. But it wasn't the sweet version. It was a distorted, booming orchestral arrangement that vibrated the very bones of the assassins. The music was a carrier wave. It was uploading the Black Ledger directly to the internet, bypassing every firewall Vance had set up. "What have you done?" Vance roared, clutching his ears. "I didn't just give away the money, Commander," Emily shouted over the roar of the music. "I just gave away your secrets, every name, every bribe, every murder. It's all public now. You aren't hunters anymore, you're the prey." The tactical teams scrambled. Their headsets were flooded with static and the sound of Emily's voice. Outside, the sirens began to wail, but they weren't the local police. These were federal marshals, tipped off by the massive data dump Emily had just triggered. Vance lunged for Emily, but he was intercepted by a shadow. It was Toby. He wasn't in a wheelchair anymore. He was standing by the control panel in the study, his laptop connected to the house's mainframe. "Game over, Vance," Toby said, hitting the enter key. The mansion's security system, the one Thomas Cole had built himself, engaged. Heavy steel shutters slammed down over every window and door. The Morning Star protocol was complete. The house was now a fortress, and the assassins were trapped inside with the evidence of their crimes playing on every screen in the room. Vance looked at the monitors. He saw his own bank accounts draining to zero. He saw his face on the news as a wanted terrorist. He dropped his weapon. The silent architect had been defeated not by a gun, but by a song and a girl who refused to be a victim. The sun began to rise over a quieted New York. The tactical teams were led out in chains. Commander Vance was gone, taken by the marshals to a BlackSide prison where no judge could save him. Arthur sat on the front steps, Emily leaning against his shoulder. They were both covered in dust, but they were alive. "He really was a ranger, wasn't he?" Emily asked, looking at the silver locket, which was now empty and quiet. "The best," Arthur said. "And he'd be so proud of you, Emily. You didn't just survive. You finished his mission." Emily looked down at her hands. They weren't shaking anymore. "The money is gone. The secrets are out. What's left?" Arthur smiled and pulled a small, wrinkled piece of paper from his pocket. It was the original flyer for the talent show, the one Emily found in the trash. "What's left," Arthur said, "is the music, and a very hungry little brother who still wants that plate of food you promised him." Emily laughed. For the first time, it didn't sound like a ghost. It sounded like a girl. 10 years had passed since the night the world stood still to hear a homeless girl sing. To the public, the Cole scandal was a distant memory, a story told in documentaries and case studies about corporate greed. But for Emily Cole, now 18 years old, the music had never stopped. It had simply changed its tune. Emily stood on the balcony of the Morning Star Center, looking down at the children playing in the park below. She was no longer the shivering girl in a torn hoodie. She wore a simple, elegant suit, her hair tied back, and around her neck, always, was the silver locket. It was no longer a key to a black ledger or a weapon of war. It was just a reminder of where she came from. "They're ready for you, Emily," a voice said from behind her. Emily turned to see Leo. At 16, he was tall, healthy, and possessed the same mischievous spark in his eyes that their father once had. He was wearing a graduation gown, having just finished his early conservatory program. "The first class of the Voice of the Streets scholarship is waiting," Leo smiled. "And grandfather is already in the front row, complaining that the seats are too comfortable and it'll make people fall asleep during the speeches." Emily laughed, a sound that carried no trace of the trauma that had once defined her. "Let him complain. It keeps his heart beating." As Emily walked onto the stage, the room didn't erupt in the frantic, hollow applause of a talent show. It was a standing ovation of deep, rhythmic respect. These were people whose lives had been changed by the trust Emily had created, former foster kids who were now doctors, street musicians who were now world-class composers, and families who no longer had to choose between rent and a plate of food. In the front row sat Arthur Cole. He was much older now, using a motorized chair, but his eyes were as sharp as ever. Next to him was Toby Miller, the chief technology officer of the Morning Star Foundation. Toby had used his brilliance to build a global network that tracked and stopped the kind of financial corruption that had destroyed Emily's parents. Emily stepped up to the microphone. She didn't have a prepared speech. She didn't need one. 10 years ago, Emily began, her voice steady and resonant, I stood on a different stage and asked if a song was worth a plate of food. I was told that I was a loose end. I was told that my voice didn't matter because I didn't have a name or a bank account. She paused, looking out at the diverse faces in the crowd. We proved them wrong, not because we became rich, but because we realized that the only real wealth is the person standing next to you. My father, Thomas Cole, taught me that a song is a promise. It's a promise that no matter how dark the night gets, the morning star will always rise. Today, Emily continued, we aren't here to crown a winner. We are here to start a new melody, I'd like to invite someone to the stage." A small girl, no older than 8, walked out from the wings. She looked exactly like Emily had, small, nervous, clutching a tattered notebook. Her name was Maya, a girl the Foundation had found living in a shelter just months ago. Emily knelt down so she was eye level with the girl. She took off the silver locket and placed it into Maya's small hand. "This used to hold secrets," Emily whispered, loud enough for the microphone to catch. "Now it's empty. I want you to put your own dream inside it, and when you're ready, I want you to show the world what you've written." Emily sat down at the grand piano, the same one her father had played in the home movies. She began to play the lullaby, but this time it wasn't a haunting plea or a battle cry. It was bright, hopeful, and soaring. Maya began to sing. Her voice wasn't like Emily's. It was different, raw, powerful, and filled with the future. As the music filled the hall, the scene transitioned into a montage of the characters' fates. Martin Cole, we see a grainy shot of a gray prison yard. Martin is older, forgotten, scrubbing floors. He looks up as a television in the break room shows Emily and Maya. He realizes that while he owned everything, he ended up with nothing. He turns away as the other inmates ignore him. The Foundation. We see Morning Star centers opening in London, Tokyo, and Lahore. We see thousands of children sitting at long tables, laughing over warm plates of food, with music teachers humming in the background. The family. We see Arthur, Leo, and Emily sitting at a quiet dinner table in the mansion. There are no bodyguards in the room. Just a family, a home-cooked meal, and the sound of the rain outside, no longer a threat but a peaceful rhythm. The sun was setting over the quiet hill where Thomas and Sarah Cole were buried. Emily stood there alone, holding a single white rose. The city hummed in the distance, a low vibration of millions of lives moving forward. "We did it, Dad," Emily whispered. "The song is everywhere now. They can't stop it." She placed the rose on the headstone. As she turned to leave, she heard a faint sound. It wasn't the wind. It was the sound of a young boy nearby, sitting on a bench with a guitar, practicing the very melody she had just played. He didn't know who she was. He was just playing because the music made him feel brave. Emily smiled, tucked her hands into her pockets, and walked toward the light of the city. The screen fades to black. If Emily's journey from the streets to the stage moved you, hit that subscribe button now to join our community of storytellers. Also, tap the bell icon so you're the first to witness our next big reveal.